Right, welcome to another investigation here. Now this one is basically a little investigation based on a supposition what I've thought, which is basically my thinking is that Islam may be one of the countries of Islamic origin, right, has declared war on Britain, right, and the authorities of Britain, the government, just has not informed the public. Right. So basically, what you've maybe this is like a theoretical supposition. So basically, what you've had is a declaration of war, right? Then a conquering, right? And then that through to the next stage of the legal warfare, which is peace, right? So it's then, after the war is sort of sorted out, right, and you've got a winner in the war, right, then after they sort the peace treaties and the peace deals out and all this, right, so what I'm thinking is that Islam, or like I say, maybe one or two of the countries which are Islamic, right, waged war. Maybe Saudi Arabia, for example, right, is one. Dubai, them type of places, right? Maybe an Islamic Corps allegiance or something, they've declared war, right? And the what you call the UK government, right, which is a government in Britain, right, has capitulated straight away, right? So that there doesn't need to be any physical fighting, right? Obviously, they would do that in order to get money for themselves, like payoff. So say, like, we're going to do this, we're going to declare war on you, right? Remember how nowadays everything's about legalities as opposed to lawful stuff, right? So you don't even, if you declare a war, right, you don't even need to back it up with an actual war. You see what I mean? You don't need to back it up with an actual battle and fighting, right? And this is where this type of religion and peace idea comes in, right? So it's brokering the peace. So they've declared war, right? They haven't fought, like, physically any battles, or right, but they've declared war and then bought off the politicians, right? So that there's no need to be any people killed, right? Which would be appealing to majority of these politicians, like, right? You see, well, let's stick $1.5 million in each one of your bank balances. All you've got to do is go along with this little plan, right? So it's all legal, not lawful by any means, a stretch of imagination, but all legal, right? So they get straight to the peace treaties, right? Now we're still brokering the peace, right? So everyone's happy, type of thing. The public are in the dark about it, right? They're doing war, right? And obviously these upper class ones think that the British peoples are thick, type of thing, right? So there's no need to inform them the war has been declared. Right? The politicians get a nice big fat bank balance from Saudi Arabia, right? Something like that. Right? And the new people, these Islamics, put their people in, right, without any opposition. As as they say about that thing about the young fighting age men. Millions of young fighting age men get put in, right? But the new uniform, the military uniform, right, does not have to be camouflage. With a rifle out of the back, right? The new uniform just becomes trainers, jeans, trainers, and a hooded sweater. See what I mean? But it still has the same boots on the ground type of factor, as if he was important in tens of thousands of enemy soldiers, combatants, armed and putting them onto the streets. See, the same factor of intimidation of the public is basically factored into this. So they're putting these immigrants men on the streets of Britain, right, to basically have that intimidation factor, right, against the general public. Right? And obviously this varies on which parts you're in, like places to places and all that, right? But ultimately when it builds up to London levels, like you have that in place, right? So basically that's my supposition about this, right? So then you get this idea of religion of peace, because they've gone straight to the peace, right? And just skip the battle, skip the battle, right? So you declare war, right? And then you skip the battle and you go right to the declaration of peace, right? So as you see here, brokering the peace after war. Islam is the religion of peace, right? So it's after war type of thing, scenario, treaties and agreements, and all this type of thing, and international peace building, Of course, like making this one world government type idea and all this. So you're talking about, if you're not about the religion of peace, Islam, Muhammad. The Muhammad character is a general and a military person and all this. This is where it differs from Jesus, right? So when there was brainwashing the Western people with Jesus, right? Jesus was like he certainly wasn't a military broker, no, right? He was like a hippie or something, and the Muhammad one is basically, I don't know if he's opposite of Jesus, but he's a military one who went to war with different peoples and all that, right? So you can see the two variations in the brainwashing, what they're giving to the two groups of people, right? But on the white ones basically follow Jesus. Jesus obviously is that type of thing where he got slapped in the face and then turned the other cheek, that type of thing, right? And then Muhammad is basically a war general, right? So you will see, the military career of Muhammad, right? And obviously the conquest of Mecca is the biggest victory. So Mecca, Mecca becomes symbolic for some type of a conquered, civilization or peoples. Right? Obviously, when the Muslims walk around the Kaaba stone, that's like a pilgrimage to Mecca. Right? So basically, you got the idea of coming over the Western lands again, forms like a pilgrimage to Mecca type idea, to conquer. It's funny how you got that idea of Medina, like the Medina, could be like in media, it's a sort of conflict is played out in media, between Jews, Islam, and Christianity. And obviously, if it was any realities to it, the Jews wouldn't be importing their own enemies into the countries where they are, So obviously it's fake as. But you see the difference between when they're trying to get now they're trying to get the Western ones, right, to bring back Jesus and get into Jesus again and all this way. You can see why, because Jesus would basically capitulate. Jesus would capitulate, whereas Muhammad would go to war and try to conquer peoples. Jesus would just capitulate and let them walk in and take their lands out. So obviously they want to bring back a Jesus idea for the West. Let the Mohammedans walk in and take the place, But so basically, right, the different ideas is in the Muhammad Islam. The peace comes about through war. Right? First you conquer, go to war, conquer, then you have peace. Right? And the Western Jesus stuff is just basically about what's it called? Pacifism type idea. So it's set up, the whole situation is set up for the Islamic ones to conquer the supposed Christian ones. So East to conquer West. It's a setup, where rigged, where the outcome is already the outcome's already bought and paid for, literally. This is some of the brainwashing, right, what they've used upon the Western peoples, right. Notice a few Tom Cruise stories back in the media stuff in the last few days, right. It's only from 8 hours ago. Tom Cruise. You know, this Tom Cruise, his real name's Mapper. So the cruise idea is basically relating to the Crusades, right? The Crusades. And then in turn, right, you've got the cruise missile, right? Which again is basically named after the Crusades, right? The cruise missile. So you see that used a lot as well in the program, because it's basically a Crusades type of idea what they're utilising. The last 40-50 years of brainwashing, the AIDS idea was a big thing, right? Now if see here, right? National AIDS Trust, NAT. So basically nation, the nations that are being destroyed under God's order, right? Now the nations comes the Goyim ideas and all that, right? So you had this AIDS was basically crusades, right? The crusade against the religious wars, right? As I say, the outcome is already rigged. East wins, right? Like the Islamics are going to conquer, type of thing, right? In their storyline script, right? So basically, you had the AIDS, you had the high-profile cases like Kenny Everett and Freddie Mercury and all this, right? And that basically stopped the birth rates for the Europeans. So this stuff basically frightened the Western ones, right, into lower birth rates, right? And of course, if you're talking about being out there in Pakistan or Africa or stuff like that, you wouldn't have heard of this disease, like type of thing. They didn't have they didn't have the same brainwashing. A lot of people obviously see it started in Africa and all that. It's definitely a psyop type of thing, right? That this is responsible for a lot of lower birth rates, right? In Europe, in Britain specifically, right? Of course, in walks your Eastern ones, under the idea that we need because of lower birth rates, we've got to bring in all these sort of immigrant people. That's what they say. As you can see by this, they wish to create that storyline that because of the lower birth rates, they've got to have immigrants come in, right? For some reason. To me, it doesn't make any sense. You've got, you just need people alone in their own countries, and they can have as few kids or as many or whatever as they want. Why do you have to bring in immigration? See what I mean? It doesn't make any sense, but obviously we know the reason for why they're doing it, right? So this is again, we say it's a fix. It's a fixed outcome where the Islamic ones, right, are basically to conquer the Western countries. Right, so obviously this the Reform Party, right, as we know, is basically full of Muslims. So of course you've got a lot of conflicting stuff there. Reform UK and the rising threat to Muslims. There's about 5 Muslims in the party anyway. The high-profile Muslims, right? So as you can see, this is all gaslighting, right? And basically this party has been either the biggest gaslighting thing from day one, right? Just a total piss take from day one, with obviously the intention to bring Muslimism in, right? Or as they went along, they had to amend their sort of policies to incorporate like the sort of what the higher establishment wanted. But I just have a feeling that it was a piss take on day one, gaslighting. Because obviously that Muslim one was in it from day one. So it's been probably one of the biggest piss takes for a long, long time. And of course, these aren't going to change anything except give the place over to Muslim control.